Welcome to Lessons in Leadership with me, Steve Adubato, and my colleague, Mary Gamba. The programming that you're about to see was taped earlier this year. Clearly, so much has changed since then, and unfortunately, a lot of uncertainty and fear remain. However, the issues and the topics raised in this edition of Lessons in Leadership will still matter once we get through these very challenging and difficult times. So without further ado, Lessons in Leadership. Welcome to Lessons in Leadership. I'm Steve Adubato. I'm here with my colleague, Mary Gamba. How are you doing, Mary?
Doing great today, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to talk a lot right out of the box about leading in challenging times. Some people call it a crisis, but it's in the eye of the beholder, whether you call it a crisis or a challenging time or whatever it is. But we're going to be talking to our longtime colleague and friend, Bob Garrett, from Hackensack Meridian Health in just a minute. Mary, do us a favor, let folks know who the sponsors of the show are.
We have some great sponsors. We've got Prager Metis. We also have Gibbons Law Firm, New Jersey Resources, Valley Bank, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825.
And by the way, you're watching us on News 12 Plus, listening on AM 970, and a whole range of other outlets, including?
Including NJBIA, NJ.com, Best of NJ. You can also subscribe to the podcast at Apple Podcast as well as on Google Play.
Here we go. So listen, we're taping this program on the 9th of March. You don't need me to tell you that as we do this program, and you'll see it after that there's been tremendous concern, anxiety, nervousness, fear around the coronavirus. We hope that when this program airs in a couple of weeks, it will not be as severe, but we don't know. But I'll tell you what, and I just said this before to Mary, whether it's this particular situation or the SARS situation before that or the Ebola situation, public health challenges really challenge leaders. And on the line right now is Bob Garrett, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Hackensack Meridian Health. Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Good to be with you guys.
Bob, do us a favor. Let folks know exactly what the footprint of Hackensack Meridian Health is.
Sure, Steve. Hackensack Meridian Health today is a 17-hospital health network. We have 500 patient care locations, and that ranges from physicians' offices to surgery centers, urgent care centers, assisted living, fitness centers, as well as a vast post-acute care network, including nursing homes, rehab centers, and subacute care centers. So it's an extensive healthcare network that's really located throughout the state of New Jersey. We have 36,000 team members, 7,000 affiliated physicians that are working with Hackensack Meridian.
And to that end, let me disclose that I've done a significant amount of leadership and communication coaching within the network. We actually, I'm teaching in a physician leadership academy there as well. And really it brings us to this point. So, Bob, there was an article in ROI, correct, Mary, by Tom Bergeron?
Yes.
In ROI, that really talked significantly about the kind of communication that Bob has been involved in as it relates to the coronavirus. Bob, let me ask you this. Whether it's the coronavirus or fast forward could be any situation, we're hoping and praying nothing else gets worse, but how do you prepare and how have you prepared for a crisis when you don't know exactly how it's going to play out or when it's going to hit?
Well, I think there's certain fundamentals, and in the healthcare industry, there's been, a series of crises historically, and as you said, whether it's the coronavirus or it might have been SARS or Ebola before it, or in the case of Hackensack Meridian, we were hit with a ransomware cybersecurity attack just a couple of months ago. There's certain fundamentals. I mean, you have to prepare the organization. You have to practice. You have to drill for different scenarios that are out there. You have to educate your workforce. And then you have to have a really solid communication plan that really is proactive and is timely, is accurate. And, some people, say, well, sometimes, you might be overkilling communications. I don't believe that. I think particularly in challenging times, in times of crisis, people are looking for accurate information. They're looking for timely information. And I'd rather be accused of practicing overkill than not communicating enough. And you can allay some of those fears that you were referring to earlier.
So it's interesting, Bob. To what degree do you, as the leader, the CEO of the organization, feel that it's so interesting, this question about who is one thing is what's the message, the other question is who's the messenger, and obviously on the national level, that issue's being played out. President Trump is speaking a lot about this. Leaders at the Centers for Disease Control are speaking a lot about this. There are clinicians and non-clinicians. You're a non-clinician, but you're the CEO of this very large healthcare network. Do you feel it should be you or someone else with a clinical background who's, quote, actually communicating?
It's actually, the answer to the question is it's both. So I think it's very important that the CEO, the leader of an organization, really speaks for that organization. Many times I've referred to myself as the chief mission officer because, it's important that the mission of the organization always is in the forefront, and that it's communicated over and over. In our case, it's about care transformation. So I think it's important whether it's a time of crisis or just in everyday communication. Having said that, though, it's important that you make sure that subject matter experts also weigh in and communicate regularly. So in our case, we've had daily communications, not just from me in terms of the overall situation, but also from our chief medical executive for the Hackensack Meridian Network, as well as our chief of infection control and infection prevention, because they are the subject matter experts when it comes to this coronavirus communication. Now, when we were communicating about the ransomware, about the cybersecurity attack, we had others like our chief of information technology as one of our key spokespeople. So I think it's important that people hear from the leader, the CEO in this case, because there's probably nobody like the leader that can at least reassure people that we're managing the crisis, that we're covering all the contingencies. But it's also important to recognize that the CEO is not always the subject matter expert, and therefore you got to bring in the appropriate people, the appropriate clinical people, the appropriate scientists, the technicians, depending on what the situation calls for.
You're listening to Bob Garrett, who is the CEO of Hackensack Meridian Health. This is Steve Adubato and my co-host Mary Gamba in the studio here. This is Lessons in Leadership. We're here at East Main Media Studios. Bob, let me try this one on you. So, again, we've talked a lot about leadership offline as well. And one of the keys in a crisis is for a leader, for he or she, to stay calm. Let me ask you this question, because people are watching you. People are playing off your cues. And I will say, it's so interesting. We're talking about real challenging situations. Mary has been very critical of me, appropriately so at times, when things have gone wrong, say in the studio, and I haven't handled that well, and I overreact, and it makes things worse.
Absolutely, it makes things worse.
Exactly. So, Bob, here's my question. In a real crisis or a real situation, how do you, there's no other way to say this, quote, manage your emotions?
Yeah, I think it is important that you're as a leader, you're in a fishbowl. Honestly, Steve, whether you're in your office environment, or in my case, if you're out amongst our physicians at the hospitals, it is incredibly important to stay calm, to stay cool and collective, as well as very focused. So last week, as an example, when this coronavirus crisis became more acute and it really looked like there was going to be more community spread, I was out there. I rounded at 6 different hospitals last week. I was very visible. People saw me, interacting with our various team members in a very, very calm way. But, I attended some safety huddles where the coronavirus was talked about. We spoke about it, was very transparent about the fact that we did have a patient at one of our hospitals that was under care, and gave the team a little bit of an update about that, even though I was at another hospital at the time, not the hospital that the patient was at. I think that visibility and calmness, during a crisis is so important. And even in the communication, it's very, our communications are very factual. They're very calm. They're soothing, if you will, because I think people get reassured when they hear how the team is doing. And I never pass up an opportunity to compliment our team as well, because these folks are on the front lines and they're saving lives each and every day. But they're still right on the front lines there, and it's something that I would never take for granted.
By the way, let's remind folks, we are in fact taping this interview about crisis leadership, if you will, with Bob on the 9th of March. I want to be really, really clear. If you want to get day-to-day news as to what's going on, our partners and friends over at NJTV News do a great job of that, or News 12 Plus. You can check them out as well at News 12, their operation, and a whole range of other news platforms. This is not a news program. It is a program about leadership to help leaders be the best they can be under challenging circumstances. Bob, last question before we let you go, because I know you're dealing with a whole range of issues. I'm a big fan of what I like to call, quote, disciplined communication. And Bob's a football fan. He's a fan of the New York Football Giants, if you will. And so, Bob, here's the connection. I often say it's important to communicate, I'm doing this on camera, within the goalpost. What I mean by that is your main message, the things you need to get across, have to be within the goalpost. Stay disciplined, stay focused, Mary Gamba, right? And when you start getting outside the goalpost and saying things that you're not sure about, that you really shouldn't be getting into, things that are incorrect, it's dangerous. How do you, trust me, there's a question here, Bob, how do you stay inside the goalpost?
I think you're absolutely right about staying inside the goalposts as being real important. I think your message needs to be relatively short, needs to be concise and focused and factual. And we do a lot of fact checking before communications go out. And the other piece is, I said it before, but bring in the subject matter experts. If you're not sure about a fact, don't put it out there in the communication. Make sure that your subject matter expert can comment on it. Honestly, before we had our cybersecurity attack, I didn't know every aspect of our cybersecurity protection system, but I did bring in the appropriate people as part of our communication, as part of our leadership plan to address those kinds of specific issues. And by the way, one thing in leadership in terms of being a secure leader and a mature leader is sometimes admitting you don't know.
That's right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Saying I just don't know. If somebody asks a question, I'm at a town hall meeting and I don't know the answer, I'm not going to try to guess at it. I'm going to bring in the appropriate people, or if I don't have that person there, I will often say I will get back to you with the correct information, and we do.
To Bob's point, that is what I mean by being disciplined, Mary. If you don't know, actually trying to answer a question in a public forum in the media that you don't know the answer to, you're going outside the goalpost, and then you're going to try to put the genie back in the bottle, say you were taken out of context. That's dangerous stuff. So, Bob, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about leading and communicating in very challenging times. Thank you, Bob. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Good stuff. Mary, let's go to a break right now. We'll be right back after this talking more about communicating and leading in very challenging times. This is Lessons in Leadership. I'm Steve. That's Mary. We'll be right back.
This is Mary Gamba. If you want more leadership tips and tools, log on to stand-deliver.com. That's stand-deliver.com.
This edition of Lessons in Leadership is brought to you by Gibbons PC, Prager Metis, Valley Bank, New Jersey Resources, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825. Welcome back to Lessons in Leadership with Steve Adubato and my colleague, Mary Gamba. Quick reaction, Mary, to Bob Garrett's comments?
It's fascinating hearing a leader talk about in real time when there's a crisis happening. Some of the key things that I was jotting down were educate, be visible. You don't need to be the smartest person in that room, and that's really what I took away from it. Most leaders, they think, hey, if there's a crisis, I need to be in there and I need to have all the facts. And Bob really hit it on the head that you don't need to have all the facts in those types of situations. You need to know who to go to get those facts, and if you don't, they're not in that room, you let the people know, hey, listen, I don't have that answer. I'll get back to you at a later time.
You know, again, this really brings up a fascinating question. We're taping on the 9th, of March. It'll be seen after that. It'll be heard after that. Take your politics, your political views, your ideology, try to put it aside for a second, all right? But I often study and think about President Trump, or any president. I've been doing a lot of research around presidential leadership. There's a really wonderful book that C-SPAN put out. Mary, Google the name of that.
I think it's just called The Presidents.
I think it's called The Presidents,
It is,
put out
yeah.
by C-SPAN. And they had all these different presidential historians, Doris Kearns Goodwin, who wrote about the Roosevelts, a whole range of other people, Doug Brinkley, a great presidential historian. The reason I mention it is because I'm a student of presidential leadership. What does it have to do with this? Well, whether it's FDR or John F. Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson or Abraham Lincoln, they all faced one crisis or another, right? So what struck me, and what is worth putting on the table, is for President Trump, I think it's very challenging. And again, we're taping on the 9th of March. Go back to the beginning. People want to be optimistic. You want to be positive. You don't want to scare people. A really important part of leadership. But is there also a risk for a leader in a crisis of downplaying, minimizing, and also potentially blaming others? I remember the president blamed on the media, the quote Democrats. Again, forget your politics. And also was saying that it's a very limited situation, it's not going to spread, and the vaccine's coming in a couple months. My only question is this: can a leader make the mistake of being overly optimistic in a situation like this?
It's a balancing act. You don't want to give the public a false sense of security by saying that everything's going to be okay. On the flip side, you don't want him running around with his arms up in the air and saying the sky is falling. Nothing good is going to come of that either. What Bob Garrett had said, the CEO of Hackensack Meridian Health, who you just had on, is educate. Get the information, be factual, but be concise.
What if you don't know? See, but in a very public press conference, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
In a very public press conference, when the president said that a vaccine for this particular virus, and again, this is really not about the coronavirus, it's about leadership in challenging times. When the president said that the vaccine would be available in a few months and on the outside a year, or whatever, something like that, Anthony Fauci, who at the time we're taping this is a top infectious disease expert, had to publicly correct the president and say it was more like a year and a half to be optimistic.
Ouch. Ouch. It's hard. He had to do that, and you and I have talked about this offline.
Dr. Fauci?
He had to. There are millions and millions of people tuned in, waiting to hear the latest fact. Every day I wake up, I take a look at Facebook to see the new cases or Twitter. And he needed to jump in, but there has to be a nuance. There has to be a delivery. So it doesn't make it seem like, oh, President, no, you're not right with that. It's, oh, let me just clarify for those listening that this is exactly what you mean, right? It's all in how you nuance it. It's how you phrase it. So this way you're not necessarily putting down the person or saying, but you just want to make sure that you're giving the most accurate information.
This is an interesting question because Mary and I talk about this a lot. Now, again, I'm the leader of our small organization. Brian's the leader here at East Main Media. People watching, listening right now, there are different kinds of leaders in all kinds of situations. And it's not so much just about crisis communication, but I am curious about this. Should someone on a leader's team correct publicly the leader when he or she says something that's simply not true, or do you let it go and talk privately
if the stakes are high, and especially in that case, I believe that was live, right?
It was live.
That was live. In that situation where everybody is taken down, everyone's terrified. It's something new. It's something we don't know, and we want to get information. In that situation, and it is by a case-by-case basis, you do need to interrupt and correct and be factual, because that information is then going to be disseminated in so many other ways. So if you don't fix it right then and there, but in some other situations, sure. We've had times where later on we'll go back and say, oh, Steve, you could have handled this differently, or Mary, why didn't you handle it this way with this person? But in that situation, when you're talking about facts, you need to get it straight up right at the time.
What about if the leader says, Brian, Mary, if the leader says, don't correct me in public? I'm not saying the president said that. I don't know that, but go ahead.
Well,
I'm sure he didn't like it all that much.
In the case of a public health situation,
is that different?
Let's turn the question around a little bit. I mean, should Fauci have sort of said, hey, look, step aside, let me clear the record? I think he did it politely.
Go ahead.
But in the case of our president, people often criticize him that he's dealing with his insecurities, or he has his own psychology of why he's doing these things and his ego. Also, people have commented of, well, why don't more people correct misstatements, right? And this is, again, not being political, but about President Trump. In the case of what we're talking about with a public health emergency, I think the other issue is about trust. So if we've already eroded the trust between leaders, any leader.
Any leader
right?
in any situation.
So that's really what I think the issue is. And so if you're posing the question of, well, should someone step up and say, hey, hold on, let me set the record straight. This is what needs to be known. I think in this case with public health emergency, I mean, we're seeing it evolve hour by hour.
Okay, again, I want to clarify, though.
Yeah.
We are not, the Lessons in Leadership is not a program about where are we with the coronavirus. Go to News 12 Plus, go to NJTV News, go to NJ.com, go to news sources day to day that are monitoring this. But I will say, I do think that it's appropriate. And by the way, it's interesting. We keep talking about leadership. Dr. Fauci was a leader. He led by stepping up and clarifying publicly, because that was courageous.
Oh, absolutely. And also, too, you need to realize we need to take a step back. If you're a CEO of a company and you're going in to talk to your team in an important board meeting, you need to have the facts going in, and you talked about the goalposts. You need to know what is and is not okay to say as the CEO of that company or as the leader of the free world.
And if you're not sure?
And if you're not sure, don't say it.
Just don't say it.
Go whether or not to say something to somebody that says something, as if you're a really effective leader, you're going to know what to say and what not to say.
And to what Bob Garrett said, he's not afraid of saying, hey, look, this is not my expertise.
Right.
Let me get the expert on this.
Right.
That's
you know what's so
big
interesting
point.
about that Brian just said? I'm fascinated by this, because I asked Bob a question about how you manage your emotions. The other thing is managing your ego, right? And again, one of the things that fascinates me about leadership is that people say, oh, you have to have the confidence to handle a crisis and get out front and be the man or the woman out front. Really? Is that what confidence means? How about having the confidence to say, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm going to gather people around me who are much smarter than I am about this thing. And again, could be any situation. Bob Garrett was talking about this cybersecurity situation, cyber attack. Why would a CEO be the expert on cybersecurity? Why would the CEO be an expert on infectious disease? He or she needs to be the best leader and manager of the organization.
And he needs to know who is the best expert. He or she needs to know, who do I go to for this answer? That is being a good leader, not going out there and talking about things you don't know about. So
yeah, I'm not a fan of saying I'm the smartest. I know more than the generals. I know more than the doctors. I know more. It just never strikes me as confident. It's something else. But again, as I said, my degree is not in psychology, right?
maybe one day it will be.
No, but you have a background in psychology.
I do. That's what my degree is in, and I use it every day. It's great.
What's the connection between psychology and leadership?
Everything has to do, here we go. What do we got?
Can we get
Emotional intelligence.
Dr. Daniel Goleman,
Dr.
author
Daniel
of the book
Goleman.
Emotional Intelligence. What is the connection between crisis leadership and emotional intelligence?
It's all human beings. We deal with human beings on a daily basis, over the phone, in person, and whether you're talking in a crisis, in good times or in bad, psychology and getting into understanding the human nature and how people react to the good and the bad, that's how you're going to be a success, and being able to manage and do all that.
Okay. Shift gears. What do we got? About 5 minutes left. So, Mary, can we do this? Let's go to our greatest leadership quotes of all time. Okay. So, set this up, Mary. Where do these quotes come from so people don't think they're...
They're not. We wrote all 100 of them, Steve.
There's 100 best
was
leadership quotes of all time. They do not come from Mary and Steve.
I know. Although some of them, I swear we live and breathe by them. But article on Inc.com was this article by Lolly Daskell, the president and CEO of Lead From Within.
Go ahead.
And there were just so many great quotes. And throughout the series, we've been really talking about really the quotes that resonated with us. I loved When People Talk, Listen Completely. Number 14, if you're following along, Ernest Hemingway. When people talk, listen completely.
Go ahead.
You and I often talk and we joke about it. It's once you say, sorry for interrupting. Once you say that, maybe you shouldn't have interrupted. If you're sorry, now sometimes you have to. What we do in television, things are timed. You need to really make sure to keep it flowing and moving. But sometimes you need to be truly present and listen and not be thinking about what you're going to say next. I am the worst at that. I'm always thinking about what I want to say. I always want to be prepared. And I've been trying to practice being more thoughtful while someone is speaking and actually listening to what they are saying.
I'm sorry, you finished? I don't want to interrupt
I'm done. Go ahead. Good job. I noticed. I was seeing how long I could go, and then I gave you a pass.
Did that look like I was listening?
Yeah. What's your next number?
So how about this one? This is interesting. This is from David Starr Jordan. I don't even know who that is. Number 23. Wisdom is knowing what to do next. Skill is knowing how to do it. Virtue is doing it.
What does that mean to you?
I have no idea.
I wondered because I read that one and almost circled it, and I didn't really know what he was saying.
Do you know why
so then I moved on. Why?
Because I thought you might be able to tell me what it meant.
No, that one didn't really work for me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Okay, I got it. Number 16.
Okay, you go.
Ready? Mm-hmm. Number 16. It doesn't matter what number it is. Not like you have the list at home. Andrew's sitting there going, why Steve giving the number? Okay, here it is. One of the tests of leadership is the ability to recognize a problem before it becomes an emergency. See, this one's huge.
Huge.
Go ahead.
Huge. We talk about that, especially in business. It's so important. A true leader is able to see things, feel things, predict things, and see trends, a pattern, if you will. And so this way it doesn't become a major problem. You could kind of nip it in the bud a lot sooner. So that's a good one. Connecting the dots.
Yeah. I mean.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
I'm big on that one. But where's the other one about office hours? Oh, here it is.
Oh.
This is from Cardinal Gibbons. There are no office hours for leaders. Again, we've touched on this before. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this with Kika Wise, we did a separate lessons in leadership with Kika. She runs a great stretching studio, and she has a franchise of, I think, 11?
Yeah,
11
she's
all around the
11
country.
all around the country.
But she's always thinking. You're always thinking. I'm always thinking. Brian's always thinking. Do you think it takes a certain kind of person? There are no office hours for leaders. Do you think there's only a certain group of us? And I'm not trying to be an elitist here, but I
do. I think there's a certain group of people that are constantly looking to strive, to learn, to grow. And there's other people that are doers, and we've talked about this before, but they go to work 9 to 5, they punch the clock, they get home, and then it's all done. They don't want to think about it until they get to work the next day.
Anything wrong with that?
No, I think to each their own. I mean, the beauty of, living life is everybody can do what they want to do. And if it works for a certain person, it's not me, it's not you, then I think that's okay.
I'm torn on this. Got a minute left. I don't want to open up this massive leadership Pandora's box, but I actually don't think it's okay, and I'll tell you why. Because in this day and age, with the level of uncertainty, the level of competition, the level of innovation that is necessary to stay relevant, if organizations only count on certain people to be the ones to come up with ideas, to stay ahead of the trends, to be innovative, and a significant number of people on the team, they're just going to do their job every day and go home at 5 or a little before we know who you are. That doesn't work. Sorry. And I'm not saying everyone has to be as committed or obsessed as some of us, but come on, really? I'm just going to do my job and go home?
Certain jobs, though, certain jobs you can be done at 5 o'clock and just go home. There are certain jobs that you can. And again,
in a dynamic, successful company?
Well, I guess we're talking different types of professions, but sure, I do think that there is a place for those types of people. You and I have agreed to disagree on that. We could talk about that in another 10 years, but.
And you know what? Brian's going like this.
I know.
Brian Brodeur.
That's going to be our universal signal.
that?
We'll just do this from now on when we're done.
Okay, Steve Adubato, Mary Gamba, this has been another great edition of Lessons in Leadership. I want to thank all of our sponsors and also the folks who carry us all around on the digital platforms as well as on AM 970 and also at News 12 Plus. Thank you for watching us. Lessons in Leadership, Steve Adubato, Mary Gamba. We'll be back next week, same time, same bat channel. God, that was corny.
That was so bad. This is Mary Gamba. If you want more leadership tips and tools, log on to stand-deliver.com. That's stand-deliver.com.
This edition of Lessons in Leadership is brought to you by Gibbons PC, Prager Metis, Valley Bank, New Jersey Resources, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825. Think Tank, the podcast with me, Steve Adubato, is brought to you by these public-spirited organizations.
The New Jersey Education Association, Wells Fargo, RWJ Barnabas Health, the Russell Berry Foundation, Making a Difference, Keystone Mountain Lakes Regional Council of Carpenters, your future is in our building, New Jersey Resources, Fedway Associates, ADP, a comprehensive provider of human resources technology and services, and by Berkeley College. Education prepares us to reach our dreams. Be inspired. Promotional support provided by NJ.com. Small news, big news, true Jersey. And by Insider NJ.
Welcome to Think Tank, the podcast. I'm Steve Adubato. The program you're about to see was taped earlier this year. Clearly, so much has changed since then, and unfortunately, a lot of uncertainty and fear remain. But the content in this Think Tank podcast and the issues explored will still matter once we get through these very difficult times together. Most importantly, we hope and pray that you and your family are safe. So without further ado, Think Tank, the podcast. Welcome to Think Tank, the podcast. I'm Steve Adubato. And by the way, why is this written down as if I don't know I'm Steve Adubato? We're here at the East May Media studio. And our executive producer, our senior producer, I shouldn't have promoted you right on the air already. You're the senior producer of Think Tank, the program on public television, Nicole Swennerton. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good, great. Were you, by the way, in the studio? We're about to listen to a very compelling conversation we had with Dr. Cornel West, who's a professor, philosopher, author, activist. Did you hear that conversation?
I did. We went down to the New Jersey Education Association convention to interview him, and it was an amazing interview.
In AC, right? Mm-hmm. I was watching it again. It was actually on One-on-One, our other program. It was on last night on public television. I was watching it. I was watching people watch Dr. West. They were standing around and just watching him.
They were amazed by him. And he even said, and his team even said, it took him so long just for him to get to us to get interviewed because so many people wanted to talk to him.
They were taking selfies and getting autographs. You know, Nicole, I have to face the same thing every day when I'm just walking down the street. And so Dr. West and I have a lot in common. Have you noticed?
I'm sure you do.
You're laughing right in my face. You know your review's coming up. So I just want to do this. Lauren, let me get this right. I want to thank our funders, right? And we're going to be going to Dr. West in just a minute. Let's thank our funders who so generously gave to this program, Think Tank, the podcast, the New Jersey Education Association, Wells Fargo, the Russell Berry Foundation, those great folks. We do a series called Making a Difference with them, with our great friend Angelica Berry, and also RWJ Barnabas Health. So, here's the deal. What you're about to listen to is Dr. Cornel West. If you've never seen him on national television, first of all, just Google Dr. Cornel West. When we sat down with him at this convention, he talked about a range of issues. He talked about his view of President Trump as a leader, his concern, he calls him Brother Trump, and he said consistently, because he's a very spiritual man, he abhors some of the policies, but he does not hate the man. And he believes there's a real distinction between that, as I do. You can really disagree with someone without being mean-spirited toward them. And that was a lot of what Dr. West talked about. He talked about race relations in America. He also talked about the fact that while he disagrees with President Trump on a range of policies, he was very specific about the fact that he supported Barack Obama for president, but then had real problems with Barack Obama. Serious problems with Barack Obama. And what you're about to see in this, and listen to, in this Think Tank, the podcast, Dr. Cornel West talks about the fact that in his opinion, President Obama became too close, way too close to those on Wall Street. And after the debacle of 2008 into 2009, the national recession, and what happened on Wall Street, Dr. West believes that some folks should have been held accountable. And according to him, Barack Obama embraced those on Wall Street and did nothing to punish them for what happened. And he also talked about the racial and if you will, the economic disparity of those on Wall Street getting away scot-free in his opinion. And so many people of color who are poor being incarcerated for a whole range of petty crimes in the opinion of Dr. West. He talked about a whole range of other issues, and this is an interesting quote that he had about President Trump. And again, we do not subscribe to any of these opinions, but you'll hear Dr. West. He told Anderson Cooper, our good friend over at CNN, this: Donald Trump is, at this particular moment, becoming the American version of Hitler and Mussolini. We have created a fascist Frankenstein. I asked specifically for Dr. West to break that down, explain it. I'm not a big fan of ever using Hitler in any conversation about any public figure or anyone, but Dr. West makes that case. You're about to listen to a very significant conversation with Dr. Cornel West, shot on location in Atlantic City at the New Jersey Education Association. Powerful words. Check it out. I'm Steve Adubato. We're here in Atlantic City at the NJEA Convention. 166 years they've been at it. And what's interesting about this convention is that there are educators, educational administrators, others. There are folks who have come here, also from outside of New Jersey, to deliver powerful messages. And the gentleman you're about to see on camera is just such a person. He is Dr. Cornel West. It says here, professor, philosopher, author, activist. He is so much more. 20 books later, nationally, internationally known. You honor us, Dr. West, by joining us.
Brother, I'm the one who's blessed to be here with you, and I want to salute you for being such a force for good.
It's very kind of you.
Put a smile on your father and your mama's face, though, brother.
Thank you.
You're doing wonderful, wonderful work, though, man.
Doctor, let me ask you this. Let's get right into this. One of the things that's always struck me about you is the way you talk about race and race relations in this country. A is important, B makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable important sometimes?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, education is all about making sure that we are unsettled and unnerved enough to critically examine ourselves, to scrutinize ourselves, interrogate ourselves. We can't grow without that kind of criticism. And that's a certain kind of learning how to die. You know, when you give up a certain assumption or a prejudice is a form of death, from that comes rebirth, from that comes maturity, from that comes growth. But you don't want to unsettle people in such a way that you shut them down. You're trying to make contact with our common humanity.
How do we know where? Okay, let me play devil's advocate if I could.
Yes.
So, and by the way, Dr. West gave a very powerful keynote address. It was hard to even get him over here because everybody wanted to be close to him, shake his hand, hug him, take a picture with him, because you made a difference here. Why does a convention like this, focusing, you have educators and others in the education world from all over the state, but focusing on social justice is a big theme here. What in your mind, what does that have to do with education of our children?
Well, at the very center of it, you know, the greatest American philosopher was named John Dewey. Wrote a book called Democracy and Education in 1916. He said, you can't have a democracy, you can't sustain a democracy without there being a civic education in which people are Socratic. They're willing to examine themselves. And justice simply is accountability. Is what my dear brother Jeff Stout, just retired from Princeton, calls answerability.
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 Let me operationalize that if I could ask
so
you.
that we have to have dialogue. Dialogue is at the center of democracy. When you and I are having dialogue, you keep me accountable. I try to keep you accountable. We got smiles on our faces. We know we can learn and listen from one another.
We can disagree, but do it.
Absolutely.
Do it how?
Well, one, we ought to disagree because we often disagree with ourselves.
Whoa, wait a minute.
We've got a lot of tensions inside of us. We're struggling all the time with what our views are about
If we're
X.
thinking.
Well, and even when we're honest about it, let me just say when we're honest about it, because most people think.
As opposed to I'm so sure about what I think, and nothing or nobody is going to get me off that.
That's right. There's nobody I know who believes that every exact opinion they have is one of certainty. There's got to be some probability that leaves open uncertainty. And the same is true when it comes to issues of life, of religion, of politics, of sports, of music. All these opinions are opinions that are predicated in part on being accountable to others. Why do you think John Coltrane is better than Sonny Stitt?
Than Bird.
A Bird. And you say, well, they're not. They're too good to compare each other.
Right.
Oh, what's Sarah Vaughan? Let's go New Jersey. Let's go Newark.
Let's go Newark. I'll give you
Newark.
another one.
Yes.
Woody Shaw.
Oh.
See, you didn't see that coming.
Oh, I didn't.
Because that's Newark.
Woody.
I was born and raised in Newark.
Woody's a giant.
It was Sarah Vaughan. By the way, NJPAC, Sarah Vaughan Way, if you check it out where it is.
That's
But
right.
Woody Shaw, the great jazz.
Philip Roth, another
The
genius
great.
coming out of Newark.
That's right.
But all of these, people debate about these things. It's politics, it can be music. And once you have dialogue, this is why Socrates is so very important, right? Because once you have dialogue, you got to make that human connection. I mean, the difference is that, Socrates never sheds a tear, Jesus weeps. You see?
I hear you.
Isaiah weeps, Muhammad weeps. So that weeping, the tears make a difference.
The
You
emotional
can't just
part
have
of
the
it.
dialogue. You got to have compassion. You got to have what I call a love. You got to have a certain kind of empathy.
So speaking of empathy, speaking
Yes.
of questioning oneself,
Yes.
and speaking of those who are on the national and, dare I say, international scene, the President of the United States, our President,
Yes.
Donald Trump, rarely seems to question himself. He seems very assured of his views. Does that make him, quote unquote, a strong leader?
No, not at all.
What does it make?
That the benchmark of spiritual and moral maturity, humility and tenacity at the same time. That's Abe Lincoln at his best. That's Martin King at his best. That's Fannie Lou Hamer at his best. You see. Probably your father, I didn't know him. But humility and tenacity.
Why both?
At the same time.
Why didn't he both?
Because humility, you recognize you could be wrong. But tenacity, you got to have courage to take a stand. Because we're not talking about relativism, we're not talking about a nihilism and skepticism. You have to be willing to take a stand and pay a cost. But you've got to have the humility. I could be wrong.
Does a president lack humility?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Brother Trump is the exemplification of immaturity, lack of humility. And he's got too much gangster in him. And by gangster, what I mean is thinking you got to dominate all the time. You got to be center stage all the time. You got to manipulate. You got to engage in conquest all the time. So it's not a name calling, because I've got gangster in me. I've got to struggle with it all the time. And so in that sense, I know what gangster is. And when I see it, both I feel pity, but the fact that he's president would meaning that he is dividing, polarizing. He's so tied to big money and big military, creating all kind of repercussions around the world. It's a sad thing that such a grand democratic project can produce such. I would say it's not even mediocrity, because that's a compliment.
And I've also, the quote is interesting. We're going to be sitting down with Governor Christie Whitman, former governor of New Jersey, who recently, she had a tweet up that compared the president to Hitler and then took it down quickly. Dr. West, you have said about the president that Donald Trump is, at this moment, becoming the American version of Hitler and Mussolini. My family's from Italy. I know a little bit about Mussolini.
Oh, absolutely.
We have created a fascist Frankenstein. You didn't take it. Do you take any of that?
No, I don't take it back. But the stress is on the American version of.
Go ahead.
Benito Mussolini was distinctly Italian at a particular moment, 1910s, 1920s. Hitler distinctively German, with all of the vicious anti-Jewish hatred that goes all the way back to Martin Luther. American version means individualistic, narcissistic, innocent, always claiming to be innocent.
Victim?
Victim, and especially the innocent. You see, America is a very unique democratic experiment. We've got some magnificent human beings, magnificent features that go into our energy, possibility, vitality, but this claim of innocence, perceived innocence, never taking responsibility for our actions, our words. That's why our U.S. Constitution has no reference to the institution of slavery in it.
Because we don't even acknowledge that.
You're in denial. You're in denial. You don't acknowledge it's there. 22% of your inhabitants of the 13 colonies are not just enslaved, their labor is producing the wealth for your democracy.
What does it say about us that we don't acknowledge it?
It just means we don't want to grow up. We don't want to grow up. We think we got this Peter Pan mentality. We're forever young. We're obsessed with newness and novelty. We're obsessed with youth. But the distinctive side of maturity, which is vulnerability, humility, you've got to grow up. You can't just grow rich, you can't just grow powerful. You got to grow up. Grow up means taking in your own faults. And again, when I say American, I'm not talking about everybody.
Right.
Lincoln did it, you see. Mario Rukeyser did it. Vito Marcantonio did it in New York.
Google Vito Marcantonio,
He's a giant.
Reformer in New York City.
He's a giant. He's one of the great giants. He was a lawyer for W.B. Du Bois.
That's right.
Du Bois was the greatest public intellectual in the history of the country.
Influenced you?
Oh, my God,
Your reading of Du Bois influenced you
yes.
significantly?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Langston Hughes?
Langston, too. Stephen Sondheim. He's not in denial. Act 2 of Into the Woods. Reality hits. Happy Thereafter, Act 1. Act 2, Cinderella meets the prince and discovers he has no there. You remember that wonderful line? He says, wishes come true, but not free.
I got to ask you something. You're fascinated with literature. You're fascinated with reading. Your ability to quote these extraordinary, important works of art.
Yeah.
How young were you when you knew you were fascinated by reading and everything reading would bring to your life?
As long as I can remember.
Grew up where?
You know, I grew up in Sacramento, California, chocolate side of Sacramento, California. I'm West Coast to the core, but I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Moved out?
Moved out when I was 4 years old. Yeah.
Voracious reader?
Oh, yeah. But love to read. Joy. Great joy. Beyond pleasure.
Joy.
We're talking about joy, enduring things. The joy of reading, the joy of learning.
While you're talking about joy, Dr. West, I'm going to bring you back to something. We were talking about Donald Trump. I need to do this.
Sure.
Do you believe that a significant number of those who support President Trump, who not only support him and voted for him, and a lot of you watching are longtime friends in public broadcasting, my personal friends, who voted for President Trump, but will refuse to even be critical of him about anything, right? Devoted to President Trump. Do you see them, because of Trump's policies and his rhetoric and his behavior, do you think it's inherently racist on some level?
Well, that's a good question. No, it's a good question. I mean, one...
For those who are white.
For those, yeah. But let's just first deal with Trump himself. I mean, Trump is... I'm a Christian, and he's my brother. And my brother can be my foe and my enemy politically. But he's made in the image of the same God that I'm made in the image of, which means he has the capacity to change and be transformed.
You think he sees you that way?
I don't know. You know, I never really talked to him and so forth. But my thing is not quid pro quo. You know, I don't have to love him for him to love me back.
You don't care what he thinks of you?
I don't really care, because this is my own sense of integrity. So my brother is just a human connection. So he's not a demon. He's not a devil. He's a human being who chooses to be a gangster. You see, so that's a different kind of connection. So then the people who are attracted to Trump, they got so many different kind of people attracted to Trump.
All different kind of people.
Oh, the variety, economic reasons. Some of them looked at Hillary and said, I can't stand Hillary, so I got to go with the other person, but I can't stand that person too. Others were looking at him and said, well, thank God we pushed Obama back because we looked like these black people were taking over. So it goes hand in hand. But there's a significant number of people who supported Trump who are not doing it for racist reasons. And this is very important. We see this with my dear brother Bernie Sanders, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, when Bernie and I go
Bernie
out together, oh yeah, we've traveled, we've done, you know, over 75 events together so far. When we go way out in the boonies, we got people who are fired up, who voted for Trump, upset, and now supporting Bernie.
What does in fact draw you, and we don't know where Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or anyone else is going to be, what draws you to, dare I say, a Bernie Sanders?
Oh, I mean, the thing about Brother Bernie is that he has a longevity of integrity. that he's a thermostat, he's not a thermometer. You know, most politicians are thermometers. They want to check and see what the polls are before they really utter their convictions. Whereas a thermostat shapes the climate of opinion, it doesn't just reflect it. He's been a thermostat for 40 years. So that he says what he means what he says. Most politicians don't do that.
Is he let me ask you this, is he, quote, too far left to be elected President of the United States, in your view?
I think that if we follow the polls and see what people are actually yearning for, which is security from domination, a wonderful phrase by Brother Jeff Stout again, security from domination, which is not just a matter of policy. They want to live a life of decency and dignity, and they want to get some distance from the insecurity, economic, political, and so forth. Now, I've got disagreements with Brother Bernie. I mean, you know, we debate all the time.
Reasonable people disagree.
Absolutely. See, I'm a jazz man. I don't want unanimity. You know,
That bores you.
Yeah, and, you know, I come from a black people. Our anthem is lift every voice. It's not lift every echo. I don't want people just part of an echo
Different
chamber.
voices.
You got your voice. Your voice is like your fingerprint. My voice like my fingerprint.
Unique.
We're unique, singular. We raising, we bouncing off against one another. But for Bernie, it's a question of integrity. It's hard to find politicians these days.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up another name.
Genuine integrity.
I'm sorry for interrupting. We're
Yes, no,
listening
don't
to
get-
Dr. Cornel West. I'm going to ask you this because you have, along with some others, but you've been a leader, not just in the African American community, but in this country, talking about President Obama,
Absolutely.
his tenure and his legacy,
Absolutely.
which, in your case, talking about him, has not always been pleasant and positive.
That's right.
What is the problem, in your view, with the Obama presidency, and what are the ramifications of it? Loaded question. And what the heck does it have anything to do with Donald Trump being president now? I know I just asked. I broke the rule. I asked three questions at once, but go ahead.
But that third question about the backlash, there is an element
You
of real
believe that?
backlash. Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about that. We're talking about a slice of our fellow citizens, not vast majority, but a slice of our fellow citizens. Enough to make a difference.
That's right.
Absolutely.
In key states, but go ahead.
In key states, too. But no, you see, my dear brother Barack Obama, he and I started very closely together. I supported him in 2008, supported him in 2012, actually.
In Chicago.
65 events in 2008, no, all around the country. We started in Iowa and ended up in Ohio the night before. Well, what happened was I told him from the very beginning I was going to be a critical supporter. You see, because, my calling in my lane is to try to tell the truth and be free. A politician's lane is not to tell the truth and be free, it's to get elected. So when we first met, I told him, I said, what is your relation to the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Ella Baker, right? That has to do with poverty. It has to do with mass incarceration. It has to do with foreign policy and not dropping bombs on innocent people and so forth. So when he brought in the Wall Street folk and bailed out Wall Street rather than homeowners.
2008?
2008.
9.
When he had the meeting in March of 2009 with the CEOs from Wall Street and said, I stand between you and the pitchforks, but I support you, I will protect you, and not one Wall Street criminal went to jail, and yet mass incarceration is still expanding on the ground with poor and working people of all colors, disproportionately chocolate. And when they continued to drop those drones in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Libya and Somalia, and they knew they were also killing innocent people. You see, just as a Christian and as a person, I had to go at him and say, look, that is wrong,
Sorry for
brother.
interrupting. Dr. West, you told him directly what you thought.
Yes, I did.
You said before listening is important. Being open to other points of view, that's important, particularly for a leader. As a student of leadership, I'm fascinated by the role of listening to others.
Yes.
Was President Obama listening to you?
I think initially he was, but he got disproportionately influenced by the Wall Street people, the Tim Geithners and Larry Summers, who were so tied to Wall Street at that time, and Brenner, who was tied to the counterterrorist policies of drones and what have you, and trashing the whistleblowers when it came to surveillance, Manning, Snowden, and so forth. So I had to be true to my own calling, which is to tell the truth, no matter what color the president is.
And him being black, you don't even sit there and go, at no point do you say, you know what, our first African-American president, incredible historical significance, let me back off a little bit. You don't think to yourself, a second?
Well, no, what I did was I always salute his unprecedented symbolic significance as the first black president, that's an indictment of white supremacist ideology and practice. I always give him credit. I love his brilliance. I love his poise. We miss that now with Trump, no doubt about that. But when it comes to Wall Street allowing the unaccountability, back to our issue again, when it comes to drones, when it comes to surveillance, and it took him too long for me to talk about the new Jim Crow. It took him 7 years before he had any moves against the mass incarceration system. Whereas when it comes to our poor and working people, you got to hit that head on, just like you got to hit the schools.
Do you think he ducked it? Let me ask you this. And
He
then
ducked it for political reasons.
Do you think, okay, let me.
Strategy.
So you think if he did that too early on, you think he thought, listen, we're doing a lot of, trying to figure out what's up, that if he had done that, that there were too many white Americans who just said, wait a minute, hold on. Is that right?
I think so. I think it's not just him, but that's how politicians think. They've got to be very calculating in terms of what they do and what they say.
That?
I can respect that within the context if, in fact, it's still moving in the right direction. But my calling is not to be strategic. We're in different lanes. You see, we got different lanes. My calling is to try to be a truth teller and a witness bearer and pursue truth given my own failures and faults.
Not to win.
It's not, well, I want to win in terms of making sure the issues are visible and the people's humanity are accessed.
That's winning.
That's a certain kind of winning.
We'll go back, because the last part of the question I asked is, what do you think President Obama's presidency, Barack Obama's presidency, had anything to do, if at all, Dr. West, with Donald Trump being elected president?
No, I think that there was a slice of our fellow citizens who got the impression that black people were running things and they didn't want to be in a situation where black leadership was dictating their destiny. Now, the irony was Obama's leadership was tied to Wall Street, tied to military-industrial complex.
Pretty white.
He didn't say too much about race. Remember, he wouldn't say too much about race. And I would say over and over again, I'm not talking about race just in terms of skin pigmentation. Race is about integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, and the humanity of people who have been hated and dominated. I would say exactly the same thing if we had a black supremacist civilization and white brothers and sisters have been enslaved for 400 years, enslaved for 244 years, Jim Crow for 100 years, and you got white bodies hanging from trees where you had black fight, then you got to be in solidarity with the white brothers, because it's a moral and spiritual issue.
By the way, as Dr. West talks about this, do yourself a favor, go on our PBS website. Dr. Gates did some very important work. Henry Louis Gates did really important work talking about the lynchings that went on in our country after the Civil War, and the museum that is dedicated to telling that part of the story.
Brian Stevenson.
That's tremendous.
Yeah, that's brother Brian down in Montgomery.
I saw that interview. Let me ask you this in the couple minutes we have. When it comes to race and our ability to talk to each other,
yes,
openly, honestly, with respect, as opposed to who are you with, Trump or not?
Right.
Are you here or are you here?
Right.
But I'm not saying Trump is all about race. What I'm asking is, how hopeful are you, Dr. West, that we moving forward can have meaningful, respectful dialogue without all the vitriol and hate? Loaded question, I know, as we finish up.
No, the thing is, we've got to first begin with ourselves. Are we willing to make sure we revel in the humanity of other people even when we disagree with them? To give them the benefit of being right or wrong, recognizing we can be right or wrong, and then pursue the dialogue together.
As opposed to demonizing them, they must be bad people if they don't agree with me.
That's right. No, that's not, and that's just not true, because all of us have various kind of blindnesses. All of us have various kind of shortcomings and myopia. And to the degree to which we think we're pure is a degree to which we're just reproducing the myth of America ourselves. We're so innocent. So you got a lot of liberal self-righteousness out there.
Liberal self-righteousness.
Oh, yeah, they look down on the working people, look down on conservative people, think that somehow they've got access to a truth, and these folk are just ignorant. That's innocence, too. We were criticizing the innocence at the beginning. All of us have failures. Try again, fail better. That's Samuel Beckett. Try again, fail better. All of us have certain elements of failure built inside of who we are. The question is, can we access the best of who we are? Because all of us have some real potential.
But I tell you what, you still sound optimistic to me.
Well, I'm full of hope, not optimism. I'm a prisoner of hope, but not optimism.
Real quick, what's the difference?
Hope Hope means you're going to keep moving regardless of what the circumstances are. No matter what the evidence is, you keep loving, you keep fighting for justice. Optimism means, what does the evidence look like? Does it look like it
You're not even looking for evidence. You're just
not
hopeful.
looking for evidence. That's exactly right.
Well,
Indeed.
let me say this. I am hopeful, and I'm also optimistic and confident that folks who took the time to watch and listen to Dr. Cornel West for this very in-depth interview here in Atlantic City at the New Jersey Education Association will be better for it because they'll be questioning themselves. And I cannot thank you enough. You honor us.
As long as your show is on, that's a sign of hope right there.
I'm using that endorsement, Dr. West.
Oh, please. And I say yes.
Thank you.
I'm in your corner, brother.
Appreciate it. We are in yours.
No,
I'm Steve Adubato. That, way more importantly, is Dr. Cornel West. And we thank you for staying with us. Catch you next time.
You may not have heard of TAVR. Raj and Sandhya have. It's the minimally invasive alternative to open heart valve replacement. RWJ Barnabas Health is New Jersey's leading TAVR provider, and we continue to perfect it. Patients are often back to their lives in just a few days. Innovative valve replacement surgery, because you can't be replaced. RWJ Barnabas Health. Let's be healthy together.
Think Tank, the podcast with me, Steve Adubato, is brought to you by these public-spirited organizations.
The New Jersey Education Association, Wells Fargo, RWJ Barnabas Health, the Russell Berry Foundation, Keystone Mountain Lakes Regional Council of Carpenters, New Jersey Resources, Fedway Associates, ADP, and by Berkeley College. Promotional support provided by NJ.com and by Insider NJ.